Hello, I'm David Lockington, and I'm talking about our first program of the season, which is going to be featuring Brahms' First Symphony, which many commentators have said is the best first symphony that was ever written. Not everybody felt so at the time. The important critic, Hanslick, had reservations about the symphony, as the audiences did. Brahms felt that he had been respected, but the symphony was not received with wild acclaim and extraordinary applause at first. The first symphony of Brahms, however, opened up the symphonic form at the end of the 19th century, in the 1870s, for all of the symphonists coming down through time. Since Beethoven, there'd been symphonies of Mendelssohn and Schumann, but the symphony was kind of stalling against the background of the music of the future of Liszt and of Wagner. And Brahms, with his first symphony, even with, as he said, Beethoven looking over his shoulder, reinvented the symphony in this extraordinarily powerful form. Brahms was a meticulous composer. He said at one time that he would write one note in the morning and put it in the wastebasket in the afternoon. He was very exacting, very self-critical. He'd been acclaimed by Schumann maybe 20 years before as the next Beethoven. And this actually stymied Brahms' ability to write a symphony. He wrote many other instrumental and vocal pieces before the first symphony, but it wasn't until he was in his early 40s that he was able to complete it. And Brahms, as a scholar, looked backwards as well as forward. He loved and admired a lot of Wagner, even though his ethos was completely different. But he also looked back to the music of Buxtehude, particularly of Bach. And the drama that we hear at the beginning of the First Symphony, in many ways, is more like Bach than anything Beethoven. There's tremendous tension and angularity. Hanslick said that this First Symphony, particularly the first movement, seemed to be almost pathological, the music of a disturbed, agitated mind. And the C minor of the Allegro is unlike anything that had been heard before. I think it threw everybody for a loop because it's incredibly complex. Every little gesture relates to every single note through the movement and as the symphony developed. The other thing that was confusing for people with this First Symphony was that the middle two movements don't feel very symphonic. They feel more like they perhaps belong in one of the two serenades that Brahms wrote before his First Symphony. The Andante is very discursive, lots of different character, but it's not got a sweeping kind of developmental feel to it. The third movement is almost like an intermezzo. There are dark clouds that brood here and there, but it's got a lovely kind of innocence to it. But the seriousness of the first movement is reinvigorated in the very tricky and obtuse introduction to the last movement. The clouds are parted, however, with this beautiful horn theme, and then finally the melody of the last movement, which Clara Schumann, who was not convinced about the First Symphony, said in the first performance, opened her heart. This melody appears in a very Beethovenian way, a very classic kind of Germanic melody. And it's from there that the C minor gradually is transformed into a triumphant C major, and really a very exciting Beethovenian-like ending.